Learn to speak English like a native. Join my VIP program and get a special discount on my pronunciation course at effortlessenglishclub.com. That's effortlessenglishclub.com. Welcome to today's Effortless English Show. Today, we discuss Chapter 7 of Animal Farm. So again, another show as part of our Effortless English Book Club. And we are doing Chapter 7 of Animal Farm by George Orwell. Let's just get started right away. Chapter 7, here we go. Chapter 7 begins, "It was a bitter winter." A bitter winter. So bitter, usually we use this word bitter for taste, right? It's something that is not sweet, not sour. Bitter is kind of, I'm trying to think of something, a food that's really bitter. But it's a food, it's not a very nice taste, right? Maybe some medicine is very, very bitter tasting. But we can also use bitter to describe other things, not taste. So, for example, bitter can be used to describe people as an emotion. And a bitter person is someone who's very unhappy and very negative. They're unhappy about their life. They're unhappy about the world. They blame everybody else for their problems. So that's a bitter person. Now, a bitter winter gives the idea, if you're describing winter as bitter, again, as very, very an unhappy winter. So it means it's a terrible winter. Very, very, very cold, right? More cold than normal. Cold and unpleasant. So on the farm, a bitter winter, so a really terrible cold winter. They get a lot of snow. And the ground becomes very, very hard. So during this winter, the animals continue trying to build again the windmill. So remember the last chapter, the windmill fell down, and now they're trying to rebuild it again. Now, this is a little more black humor. He says, the human beings pretended not to believe that it was Snowball who destroyed the windmill. They said it had fallen down because the walls were too thin. So it's a little bit of a joke. So he's writing this from the animals' point of view on Animal Farm. So basically he's saying the humans outside of Animal Farm, they blamed the animals. They said they built the windmill badly. They said the walls were too thin. So that's why the windmill fell down during the storm. But the animals believe, of course, Napoleon is telling them that no, it was Snowball did it. Snowball did it. He destroyed the windmill. So the animals think, and Napoleon says this, it's a lie. The humans believe this lie. But of course, it's the humans who know the truth, and it's Napoleon who's lying. Actually, they built the windmill badly. The walls were too thin. It fell down in the storm. So it was their fault. It was Napoleon's fault. But he blamed Snowball. Snowball has become the imaginary enemy now that he can blame all problems on. So all the problems of Animal Farm now, they blame on Snowball, remember, he's the pig that escaped. He was the rival for power for Napoleon, and he lost. So he had to run away because the dogs were trying to kill him. And so now that he's gone, he's sort of this imaginary enemy that Napoleon can always use to blame for anything. And he does. Now, life now has become much worse for the animals. It's actually now much worse than before. Worse than it was with Mr. Jones the human. So we've seen it getting worse gradually, right? In the last chapter, it was very close, right? It was getting close. It was at least as bad as before. But now in chapter 7, it's actually worse because it says the animals were always cold, they're usually hungry, and they're working outside in the wintertime trying to build the windmill, and it's cruel work. Cruel means mean and painful. So they're doing this terrible, difficult work in the middle of this terrible cold, and now they're always hungry, and they're usually hungry, and they're always cold. So they're miserable, basically, right? They're completely miserable now. So it's actually much worse now. Much worse than before the revolution. And all the animals now, they're losing their heart, meaning they're losing their motivation. They're losing their hope. Except only 2 animals still are strong, still are hopeful. Of course, we can guess who they are. It's the 2 horses, Clover, and of course, number 1, Boxer. Our big hero, Boxer. They still have not lost hope, and especially Boxer. And, well, the animals, they don't really feel inspired by the revolution anymore, but they're still inspired by Boxer. Boxer still inspires them. They still admire Boxer because he's still working so hard. He's still so strong, and he's not selfish. He really cares so much about everybody. So they really, really love Boxer. Boxer is just, and he's just such a good animal. In January, the food becomes even more short, and they have to cut the amount of food they're eating, which is called a ration. A ration is like an amount of something, usually food, that you are allowed to get. And they cut the amount of food for everybody again. The potatoes spoil, they make a mistake, and many of the potatoes go bad. And for many days, sometimes, the animals had nothing to eat. So they're very hungry now. Starvation, right, which means dying of hunger, seemed to stare them in the face, meaning they actually starting to be afraid they will starve to death. This sounds familiar. We can look at history. We can look in South America right now and see this exact thing happening, sadly. Now again, a little more dark humor. It says that human beings were making more lies about Animal Farm. This is the official propaganda, this section, next section. So Napoleon's saying, these are all lies. The humans are lying, saying that we're starving, saying that we're getting sick. But of course, it's actually the truth. So what does he do? Well, what he does is he has this human, Mr. Whymper, that he uses for trading, right? To trade with the outside world. So what they do is they make some kind of lies so that Mr. Whymper, so it looks like the farm is doing well. So for example, they have very little food, but they put a bunch of dirt underneath the food. Then they put the food on top, so it looks like they have a big pile, a big amount of food, but actually it's only a small amount at the top, and underneath is just rocks and dirt. And then they show Mr. Whymper so he can see, and Mr. Whymper thinks, oh my God, look at all the food they have. So then Mr. Whymper, the human, he goes out and he tells everybody else outside, oh, they have lots and lots of food. Now there's actually a slang word for this. It's called a Potemkin village. A Potemkin village. North Korea does this. I don't know if Venezuela's doing it, but I know that North Korea is famous for doing this. And they make a fake village, right? And then they bring outsiders to come and look at it. And it's a perfect village, right? Everybody looks healthy. Everybody's looking happy. There's lots of food. The technology's great. It looks really rich. Everything looks perfect and fantastic. So it's like a show. It's just a show. It's a fake. To try to convince the rest of the world, oh, look, we're rich. Look, we're doing well. Look, we're successful. But it's a lie, because in the rest of the country, it's a disaster. People are starving to death. And much worse. So, once again, Orwell showing us another propaganda technique. Now, because they're having less and less food, Napoleon realizes they need to trade. They don't have enough food on the farm, so they need to trade. They need to buy food from the outside world, or else they're going to start starving to death. And it mentions that Napoleon is now almost never out in public, right? He doesn't come out and talk to the animals very much now. Mostly he stays by himself in the farmhouse. And he sends other people, other animals, like Squealer, other pigs, or the dogs. He sends his messages to the animals through them. So he's now becoming even more separated from the animals. And of course, his house and his door is always guarded by the really mean dogs. So one Sunday, Squealer, so that's his assistant, right, Napoleon's assistant, announces to the hens that they must give away their eggs, the chickens. Napoleon has decided to take the chicken eggs and sell them out to outsiders and then buy grain, buy wheat or whatever for the animals to eat. Now you'll remember, this was one of the big complaints before the revolution, right? That Major talked about, that the humans were stealing the chickens' eggs, taking them away and, selling them or eating them. And it was this terrible crime, and they really criticized the humans for doing this. And now, Napoleon's doing it. So now it's happening to them again. But for the first time since Mr. Jones left, there's actually a bit of a rebellion. There's a disagreement because the hens, the female chickens, are really, really upset about this. Because they remember, right, this is why they wanted the revolution, so that their eggs would not be taken. And now the eggs are being taken again, this time by Napoleon and the pigs. So the chickens get really angry and they start a protest. They refuse to give their eggs to the pigs. Instead, what they do is they just break their eggs. So they break their own eggs in protest. So what does Napoleon do? Does Napoleon negotiate with them? Does he treat them well? Of course not. He immediately stops all their food. He starves them. Now again, this has a connection to history and something that Stalin did to the Ukraine. Something horrible he did. And we're seeing it here on Animal Farm. So he decides he's going to starve the chickens, give them no food until they stop their protest. And of course, after 5 days, they finally give up. The chickens give up, and they go back and they start making eggs again and giving the eggs to the pigs. But 9 of the chickens die. 9 of them starve to death during this time. So, now he's starving people to death, Napoleon is. So you can see now it has become horrible. In fact, it's much worse now than when the human, Mr. Jones, was in charge, because Mr. Jones did not starve the chickens. Next, something else happens. And this again has a connection to history and the techniques of Marxism, the techniques of totalitarianism in general. And that is, again, using snowball. It's the sort of the secret enemy, the hidden enemy, the enemy that's always around. So Napoleon starts telling everybody, and Squealer and the pigs, they start telling all the animals that Snowball is back, that he's secretly coming into the farm at night. So at night he's coming into the farm and he's breaking things. He's coming into the farm and stealing things secretly. He's coming in and doing bad things. right? So there's a secret enemy, but they never see him. No one ever sees him. It's always just the secret enemy inside, the hidden enemy, used to scare them. Snowball, Snowball. Snowball's always around somewhere, causing a problem. And anytime something bad happens, they blame Snowball. If a window breaks, they blame him. If something else breaks, they blame him. If something's missing, they blame Snowball. And then he, again, a little dark humor. He says, even when there was a key, they lost a key to a shed, to a door. They lost the key, they blamed Snowball. They said, Snowball took the key, he threw it down into the well, into the bottom of the water. And all the animals believe it. Oh, it's terrible, scary Snowball. But then, when they actually find the key and they realized, oh, it wasn't stolen, still, the animals still somehow believe that Snowball did it. And so it's kind of a joke from Orwell about how foolish the animals are, that they'll believe any propaganda, even something like this that's obviously a mistake or a lie, and yet most of the animals just believe it anyway. And then here we see another important thing that happens. Another important event. Something we see in almost every Marxist country as they go forward, and in totalitarian countries in general. And that Napoleon says we must fully investigate Snowball's activities. So it's time for investigation. So he starts sniffing around and he says, oh, I smell him. I smell Snowball. Snowball was here. And he smells around and Snowball was also here. So of course he's lying, but he's just, again, fake evidence, right? Fake evidence, just to get everybody terrified of there's this secret bad pig, bad man, bad guy who's always around and we can never find him. So he says Snowball was like an invisible influence, always menacing, meaning scaring them with all kinds of dangers. Then they tell more lies about Snowball to make it even worse. They say Snowball, this is again changing the history, right? Where after these revolutions they start to rewrite the history and change people's memories. And so they say, actually, Snowball was working with Mr. Jones from the beginning. Snowball was always an enemy. He was always working with Mr. Jones. He was a secret agent, like a spy, for Mr. Jones, the farmer. But this confuses the animals because they all remember that in the battle, the big fight with the humans, Snowball was a hero. They remember this. Even Boxer, who usually never asks questions, he also was confused. He says, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I think maybe Snowball became an enemy later, but I remember the battle, and Snowball definitely was a hero. So even Boxer is not believing the lie this time. But, of course, Squealer and Napoleon continue to lie. And they say, oh no, we found secret documents, right? Secret writing, where Snowball was writing to Mr. Jones, and Mr. Jones was writing to Snowball. But of course, you can't read it because it's secret. These are secret documents and you can't read well, so we'll just trust us. He actually was a secret spy. So again, obvious lies. And Then Squealer tells more lies, saying, no, your memory is bad. You don't remember. Snowball got injured in the fight, but that was because Mr. Jones just pretended to fight him. He just injured him a little bit. That's why he's not really a hero. And don't you remember? Napoleon attacked Mr. Jones and bit him on the leg. So Napoleon was really the big hero of the battle. And of course, this is a lie because Napoleon did not actually do that. But so all the animals kind of are confused and they don't really remember Napoleon being the hero, but they just kind of believe it. They don't trust their own memories. Instead, they trust the authority, the power. They trust the lies instead. Finally, Boxer continues to argue, saying, I don't think Snowball was an enemy at the battle. I don't think so. I don't think so. So Boxer is actually, he's remembering, and he's not believing the lies, but then finally, Squealer says, Napoleon says it's true. And Boxer says, well, remember one of Boxer's rules is Napoleon is always right, because he completely trusts Napoleon. And so when Squealer says that, Boxer changes his mind and says, well, if Napoleon says it's true, then I'll believe it. All right, so this is Boxer's, one of his huge weaknesses is his we would say naive, his foolish trust of the power, of Napoleon. Now, here's the next part that's very important. Because Squealer says, we must be careful because Snowball is not alone. He has secret agents here on the farm. Right now he has secret agents. So this is a technique. I'll go back and describe this later, but this is another common technique once the revolution gets really strong. Once they get enough power, this is what usually happens. And then finally, the terrible ending, really, of all hope, and the brutal, horrible truth of Marxism, of these totalitarian forms of control, government. They have a meeting, and this time Napoleon comes and he leads the meeting. And he doesn't really even say anything. He just gives a call, kind of a whistle, and immediately the dogs jump forward and they grab four of the pigs, by the ears and drag them, and they're in pain and they're terrified. And they take them to Napoleon's feet, and they're bleeding. And these are the four pigs who one time in a meeting, a long time ago, questioned Napoleon. They kind of argued with him a little bit about Snowball, I believe. I can't remember what they argued about, honestly, but they argued with him a little bit. They disagreed with him a little bit during a meeting. And so these dogs grab the pigs and pull them, and they're and then the dogs get so excited and they're so aggressive that actually one of them jumps at Boxer just because it's so aggressive, it just wants to attack anything, and it tries to attack Boxer, but Boxer takes his big foot, his hoof, and smashes it to the ground, and he's getting ready to kill it. He just knocks it down to the ground because he's so strong, and the dog starts, is kind of also asking for mercy. Please don't hurt me. And Boxer looks over at Napoleon, basically asking Napoleon, should I kill the dog or not? Should I let it go? And Napoleon orders Boxer, let him go. And the dog kind of goes away. Now this is important. We'll talk about this when we come back, but this is also important, this event. Now, another important thing, something we've seen in all these communist revolutions, is that Napoleon now makes the pigs confess their crimes. Confess! We also saw this during the Spanish Inquisition, when they were hunting witches and heretics. We've seen this. So some of the horrible religious groups in earlier history also used this technique. So they're not really guilty of anything, but they're so terrified that they confess. They just confess, yes, I was working with Snowball. We were his spies. Now these are lies, it's not the truth, but they're just telling Napoleon what they think he wants to hear because they're so terrified. And they've already been hurt, they're probably afraid of being tortured to death. Right? And so we've also seen this in history, which we'll discuss. When they finish confessing, the dogs tear out their throats. They bite their throats and tear them out and kill them. They murdered all 4 of the pigs. Mass murder, executions. But it doesn't end there. Next, the 3 of the chickens that were doing the protest because of the eggs, they're also ordered to come forward. And they are killed. He kills them because they protested about their eggs. So the dogs kill those chickens too. And then many different animals come forward, are pulled forward, and they confess. And they're so terrified they confess, and they just lie. They just say that, oh yes, I did something bad, or I imagine doing something bad. So even just thinking, some of them just say they were thinking some bad things. And then they're also murdered and killed. And there's a pile of bodies, a pile of dead bodies. And the smell of blood is in the air. And then it's far worse than even when Mr. Jones would kill them sometimes for food. They're not even being killed for food. They're being killed for thinking wrong. They're being killed for disagreement. They're being killed for protesting. They're being killed for just for arguing, or just because Napoleon doesn't like them. Finally, when it's all over and there's all this mass death and killing and murder, the rest of the animals kind of walk away and they're shaken, meaning they're stunned, they're surprised, they're shocked. And they don't really know what to think. It just says nobody spoke. They all just kind of go away, and for a long time nobody even can talk because they're so shocked. And finally Boxer speaks. He says, I don't understand it. I don't understand. He's just confused. He doesn't understand, right? This great hopeful revolution of helping everybody, and that he thought was going to be so wonderful, and now he's just seen all these animals executed, murdered, killed. He doesn't understand it. But because he doesn't understand, instead of trying to understand, he just goes back to saying the same thing again. I will work harder. I will work harder. I will work harder. So again, this is quite a criticism from Orwell of his. It's not even stupidity. It's just, it's kind of he's being stupid on purpose because he doesn't want to understand. He doesn't want to see the truth. He doesn't want to admit the truth to himself. And then it talks about how Clover, the other one that was a kind of a hero, a horse, she starts crying. She realizes. It says, this was not what they had aimed at. This was not their goal for the revolution. When they decided to overthrow the humans, when they decided to rebel against the humans. They'd just seen all this terror and fear and death and murder. This was not what they wanted. This was not why they had their revolution. And now they had come to a time, and this is important because I see this happening in America now. It is absolutely happening in Europe, especially the UK. They had come to a time when no one dared speak his mind. Right? They had come to a time when no animal dared. They were afraid to say what they were thinking. They were afraid to say their opinion. So no more freedom of speech. They're all terrified to say anything. You had to watch what you said all the time. They watched their friends be torn to pieces, destroyed, killed after confessing, after saying all these terrible crimes. Which of course they were doing just because they were afraid of being tortured. They were just terrified. But again, Clover also decides. She chooses ignorance. She chooses ignorance, okay? She says, whatever happens, I'll just work harder and be faithful, and I accept the leadership of Napoleon. So their answer, even after seeing all of this blood and death, their answer is still trust Napoleon and work harder. And really, it's hard to feel sorry for them anymore because they are choosing ignorance. They see the truth is obvious at this point. So it's not even stupidity anymore. It's something much worse. Finally, to feel better, they all start to sing the song Beasts of England, right? That inspiring song of the Revolution. They're so depressed, they try to sing the song so they feel better. And they start singing the song, and then Squealer comes over, Napoleon's messenger, and says, Napoleon says, you cannot sing that song anymore. It's outlawed. It's abolished. Beasts of England is not allowed anymore. We don't need it anymore. The revolution is already successful. You cannot sing the song anymore. And so he tells them they can sing, say something else, but they don't care because it's not the same. And that is the end of chapter 7. So it ends very horribly. Horribly. It ends very, very badly. Let's go back and talk about the meaning. See how things are going on Facebook. So we're live on Facebook right now. And of course, also recording this for YouTube, BitChute, and my blog, effortlessenglishclub.com. All right, let's talk about the meaning and some of the messages in this. All right, so again, a bitter winter, a terrible winter. Blaming Snowball for everything. We've talked about this already. But they're always cold and usually hungry. Now this is something we've seen in all these revolutions through history. These Marxist revolutions. Is that they always end up hungry. Because it goes against reality. So it doesn't work, in other words. It doesn't work. And of course, our latest example of this is Venezuela, where people are now starving. They're desperate and they're starving. And we see Boxer is, all the other animals are really starting to feel kind of bad now. They still trust Napoleon, but they feel bad. And, and this is another big criticism I think, and something kind of shocking we see in chapter 7 and that we have seen in country after country in history, is that even when everything becomes terrible, the propaganda is so strong that there are still many people who continue to believe it. Even now, in Venezuela, as the whole economy collapses, as people are starving to death, as millions of people try to get out of the country, still, there are many inside Venezuela who support their leader, who support their party, who support the revolution, who will not see the truth. That's how powerful the lies can be, and that's also how powerful lying to yourself can be. And it's a sad thing about humanity, actually, I'd say, that Orwell is describing. So these food shortages, they just get worse and worse. People start starving to death. And again, this is where another technique of propaganda, where they start to worry. The outside world starts to see what's happening, right? The outside world, like the Soviet Union, they see what's happening. They're not doing well. Or with Venezuela, they're not doing very well. They're starving. They don't have enough. They can't make enough stuff. And so the outside world starts to criticize and starts to see the truth. And then what they do is they start to try to hide the truth. And they make these Potemkin villages. So again, I described the situation in North Korea, another tragic example that has gone on and on and on for so long, where again, people, it's hard for us to know because they're so closed, but we do know millions of people have starved and continue to starve. We know there's all kinds of horrible things happening there. And again, they try to put on, they make these little fake villages to try to show, no, look, everything's fine, right? But nobody really believes these things, at least not after a while. Maybe in the beginning, they sort of believe it, but then eventually more information gets out and the truth gets out, and nobody believes this about North Korea anymore. We don't believe it's a perfect society with everything they need. We already know the truth. And with Venezuela, it's also become super obvious, and we've seen it in history and other revolutions like this as well. Now, another important thing that happens, this is very important, it's a connection to history, something that happened in the Soviet Union, and it's also just a general comment. And that's with the chickens and their protest. So first of all, the revolution's betrayed, right? What happens is all the reasons they say for the revolution, which is to help the common people, help the normal people and the workers to have a better life, it never happens. In fact, life gets worse for them. Only the people at the top, they're the ones who benefit. Life gets better for them, the pigs in this story. But for everybody else, all the other animals, life is now much, much worse than before. And specifically, they start taking the chickens' eggs, and the chickens decide to protest. And we see what happens in these societies when there's a protest. There's no toleration. They don't tolerate, they don't accept, they don't allow protest or freedom of speech. So what does Napoleon do when they protest? He starves them to death. He starves 9 of them to death until they give up and they quit. That's what happens to the chickens. And then, of course, later, he kills several more of them because they dared to disagree, they dared to protest. So, protest and disagreement are met with death and execution in real life, in human life, imprisonment. Again, we saw it in Cambodia, how many millions killed. Now, there's a historical thing called the Holodomor, which in the Ukraine, where Stalin starved out the Ukraine, what he saw as, potential enemies or rivals, and he starved them to death, and millions starved to death. So I believe that this is a direct comment and a direct connection to that, because again, Napoleon in this story is quite closely connected to Stalin, and this is quite closely connected. This whole story is quite closely connected to the Soviet Revolution. And so we saw this again, millions of people killed through starvation, starving them on purpose, not accidental starvation, but Stalin chose to starve them to death. Next, we see something else that we saw it in East Germany. We've seen it again in all these Marxist countries when they get enough power, and it's the secret enemy and then the secret police to find them. It's that combination. So what they create the secret enemy. Maybe it's the capitalists, maybe it's the outsiders, maybe it's the foreigners, maybe it's the intellectuals. It's someone different always, but it's usually an outside group. But then the next technique is they say, which we've discussed that already, the outside enemy. But the next step is they create the inside enemy, right? So it's not only an outside evil enemy that we have to go to war against, that we can't trust. No. It's also that there are people inside the country that are working with them, that our own citizens, our own people are also enemies. They're spies. There are spies everywhere. We don't know who they are. So in Animal Farm, there's spies working with Snowball. So they create distrust, which is the opposite of trust. So everybody's worried about everyone else. Don't trust your neighbor. Don't trust the other citizens. Anyone could be an enemy. We see this in the United States now, that the media trying to say that there are Russian spies inside America. And anyone who disagrees with them, anyone who disagrees with what the media is saying, the lies they're saying, then they must be, Russian agents. It's the same technique. The British are using this technique even more strongly with the Russians and the Russian spies everywhere. It's so ridiculous. They did this back when I was a young, very young, really more my parents' time, where it was the Soviets, and the Soviets had all the spies in America. Well, now here we are again. I'm 50 years old now, and they're saying the same thing again, the same thing. Oh, the enemies are everywhere. Oh, there's Russian spies everywhere. If you disagree, it's not that you have a different opinion. It's not that you have a right to protest, that you have a right to disagree. No, you must be an enemy. You must be working with the enemies. You must be a spy. That's why you disagree, right? So it's a way to go anyone who might disagree, they label them, you say they are a spy, a secret enemy. So everyone's always worried. This becomes an excuse to make the secret police, so that the government starts to spy on their own citizens, starts to spy on everybody, which we know, of course, is happening everywhere in the world now, thanks to the internet. They're spying on all of us. We saw in East Germany, the famous Stasi, they were kind of maybe the most famous example of the East Germans were always spying on their own citizens, right? Listening to their phone calls, watching them constantly. So everybody was paranoid. Paranoid means super afraid all the time, always suspicious. Enemies everywhere. And of course, this is a form of power and control, because then people cannot unite to fight against the pigs in this story, right? Cannot fight against the leaders because they don't trust each other enough. So you keep everybody divided so that nobody trusts anybody else. They all stay divided, so they're easier to control. And so they do these fake investigations again, right? Oh, I smell Snowball. He was here. And of course, there's no actual proof. So it's always the invisible Snowball and his agents. And then, of course, there's the rewriting of history, again, this time about Snowball, where they talk about the battle. And again, they found these secret documents, secret evidence. It's always secret evidence. National security, we cannot tell you the truth. We cannot show you this. We cannot let you look at the evidence and see if it's really true or not. Again, being used right now against Russians in America and Britain. But this has been used again in all these kind of movements, all these kind of revolutions and governments. And they rewrite history. They make, again, a little dark humor, but they make Napoleon into a hero of the battle. So Napoleon didn't really do much during that battle, but instead they make up a new story. They tell a new story that Napoleon bit, right? He bit Mr. Jones on the leg, and Mr. Jones ran away during that battle. Which he did not, but they just make it. So they make this new lie, right? And we've seen this in a lot of these dictatorships, where the dictator, he has all these medals, and they tell all these stories like he's this big hero, and they make up all these incredible stories. The dictator he's the war hero, and he's super intelligent, and everything he does is perfect, and he gets all these awards, and they make this whole big lie about his past history to make him into like almost a god, right? Into this superhero. And that's what they're doing with Napoleon. And then the terrible conclusion, the terrible ending of chapter 7, where they kill all these animals. This mass meaning huge numbers of executions, of killing. And this for me is where these revolutions, especially the Marxist ones, ultimately go. When they get enough power, they just start to murder people. Large, huge numbers of people, they just kill them. They shoot them, they starve them, they kill them. Cambodia, mass murder. Cuba, mass murder. Venezuela, I don't know if they're mass murdering now. I know people are being starved. I know they have shot a good number of people, but I haven't heard of actually that kind of Cambodia type of mass murder. But it's possible. Soviet Union, mass murder, etc. We've seen it again and again and again, and that's the terrifying, horrible thing, because they will not tolerate any disagreement. And not even disagreement, even it gets to where they're just, the leader becomes paranoid. The guys at the top become so paranoid, they're so worried of losing power that they just start killing anyone they think might be a threat, might become strong. They just eliminate, they kill anyone who could possibly disagree. So with the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, they killed intellectuals. Basically anyone who was intelligent, anyone who went to school, universities, even people who wore glasses, they saw this as a sign of intelligence. And they just murdered them all because they were afraid, the smart people might realize what was happening and try to go against them. So they just killed them all, millions of them, took them into fields outside and shot them in the head. That's where it ends. That's the terrible, terrible truth that Orwell is warning us about. This is why he wrote this book. He's warning us because we have to fight this before it becomes this bad. It's too late for the animals now. It's much too late for them now. That's why they refuse to see the truth. It's too late. They cannot accept their mistakes. Right? Because after the killing, what happens? Do the animals suddenly say, oh my God, Napoleon is evil. The pigs are evil. This is horrible. The dogs are evil. We made a huge mistake. It's much worse than Mr. Jones. We must fight against him now. Do they realize this? No, they don't. They don't. Because the most difficult thing is to see that you were yourself wrong, and they will not do it. They will not look at themselves and say, we were wrong, we were foolish, we were stupid, we were tricked. They won't do it. That's why the lies work. That's why the propaganda works in the end. They keep holding on to the lies because the truth is so terrible. And it also, the truth says something very bad about them, right? If they admit the truth, if they see the truth and they admit it, they have to admit that they created this. It was their revolution. They gave Napoleon this power. They let him take the puppies. They could have stopped him at that time. They could have said, no, you can't have our puppies. The dogs could have done that. You can't have our puppies. They're ours. And they could have fought him then and no problem. The other animals could have fought him then. But it's too late now. And they will not see the truth. They will just keep going on and on and on as it gets worse and worse. I mean, it gets even worse than this, but it's already horrible. They're murdering people. Animals in the story. But it's the same thing, Why didn't the Cambodian people just stop the Khmer Rouge? Why did they not stop them? Same thing. First of all, nobody trusted anyone else, right? They got too much power. So then nobody trusted anyone else. Everyone was afraid to stand up alone because then you get killed. And they were too afraid to get together. It was too late. And so Orwell's trying to warn us, you gotta fight it in the beginning. The reason I'm doing this, my little part on doing this book club, is to try to warn people, to share this warning with the world. That when you see this starting to happen, you've got to fight it in the beginning. It's too late once the people are being murdered. I'd say Britain is almost too late. If there's maybe a last hope for England, Britain, now, I'm not optimistic. I don't see that there are enough of them willing to fight. I think it may be too late for them. America, I don't know. America, there are people fighting back. But I don't know. It's 50-50 maybe in America. It's quite frightening. Other countries, I don't know. I know those are the countries I know best, especially the United States. But it's frightening. It's frightening. So, after all this, what is Boxer? Boxer, the great hero. Boxer who has the great heart. All he can do is just say, I will work harder and I trust Napoleon. In the end, after seeing all these animals murdered, he's got this good heart, he cares so much, and yet he ignores all of these murders and just keeps repeating the same stupid stuff. that's tragic. It's a tragedy, really. And now you can see Boxer is becoming a tragedy. And of course, Boxer represents the average, good, hardworking person. The person who most supports these revolutions. The really good-hearted, hardworking, good people of any nation. He won't see the truth. We call this willful ignorance. He's now trying to be ignorant. It's not he's stupid. It's not that he can't understand. He can. He just watched them all get murdered. So it's not stupidity anymore. Now it's something far worse. He's choosing not to see. He's choosing not to understand because he doesn't want to understand. Because understanding is too terrible. Understanding means he maybe is a bad person himself because he let this happen. It means he was trusted the wrong pigs, the wrong people. He helped this happen. He can't admit that. He won't let himself see that. And so, after all of this, he still continues just to repeat, "Oh, work harder. I trust Napoleon." How could he trust Napoleon after this? But he does. But he does. Terrible. Quite terrible. And so that's our very sad ending to chapter 7. It only gets worse after this. So it's not a happy ending, this story. It's quite awful, but he's warning us. Animal Farm is a warning. It's not a happy story, it's a warning. He's trying to warn us before it's too late. He's saying, don't let this happen to you or your country. All right, let's go to Facebook Live. I'll answer a few questions, comments, discuss a few comments, and then we'll be done with chapter 7. Okay. Yes, Paul mentions in Spain it's happening too. Not at the same level of Animal Farm, but young people becoming radicals because of many injustices like the animals in Animal Farm. Censorship is winning in Spain. Yes, I've seen this. I'm interested in this Spanish situation, actually. And I have some friends in Catalan, Barcelona specifically. So I kind of follow that situation. I'd say in the EU in general, if we really want to move it beyond Spain, we're seeing this happening in many places in the EU. Canada, I haven't mentioned Canada. Canada's actually far worse than the United States, I think. Far worse. They have laws now where they will arrest people. They can arrest people if they use the wrong pronouns. If for these people, these crazy people who think they're a man who thinks he's a woman, if you call him a man, that's against the law and you could be arrested. It's becoming pretty crazy in a lot of the West. Yeah, so he's mentioning some of the key things that you can see, whether it's whatever they call themselves, whatever group that's controlling, whether they say it's Marxist or something else, or right or left, whatever they call it, it doesn't really matter the names. But what we see is control of the media, absolutely. Putting people in jail. First they start putting in people for jail who are not criminals, who just for speaking, for protesting, for disagreeing. This kind of political correctness, they call it in the United States. Corruption, changing the history, lies, all of these things. Yes, indeed. We do indeed see all of these things. Good points. These are all warning signs, I would say. So, wow. So basically, lots of people saying, I see these same things happening in my country. Yeah, not... So we're getting, lots of comments from people in all different countries saying, I see these same kind of things. Well, that's not an accident, because these techniques are used, these techniques work. That's what's frightening. They work. They have worked. As we saw, they happened again and again, not one time. Maybe Orwell was thinking of the Soviet Union when he wrote this. I think he was, mostly. He said he was. But the Soviet Union was not the only country to use these techniques. Many, many countries. In fact, I think many countries saw how successful these techniques were, and they used them too. So it's not only full communist countries use these techniques. As I said, they're being used in the United States right now, mostly on the left side. But then again, the techniques were used for the Iraq War. I mentioned this in a previous video. And that was, the supposed conservative group. It was a president, George Bush at that time, and used many of these same techniques. So many of these propaganda techniques are now very common. And they're used by all different governments around the world, and even corporations, large, huge companies use these too, right? Because these work. They're techniques of mind control, and they have been very successful. Powerful people have learned how to use these, and they use them again and again and again. And as I said, I really believe there are two sort of sets of techniques, two general strategies of controlling groups or a population. And Orwell describes one strategy. And Orwell's strategies, the ones he describes, they're not his strategies, but they're the ones he describes so well and warned against so well in his books, are the ones that are mostly based on fear. They're based on mostly fear, killing, pain, torture, paranoia, all these kind of things. But, essentially using pain and fear to control people. That's mostly what Orwell's describing in Animal Farm in 1984. Yes, there are a few other techniques too, but that's the overall is this terrible feeling with the animals, right? They're all terrified now. They just watched so many of them get murdered, mass murder. Right? And the dogs, and there's always the threat of violence and fear. So it's this fear and pain and starvation and killing and all this stuff. So that's the one set. That's the one, we might call it the grand strategy, right? Grand meaning large or overall or big. So it's the big overall strategy. And then inside that strategy, lots of little techniques, lots of specific techniques that we're learning in Animal Farm. So it's Orwell describing the big strategy of essentially using fear and pain. Now there is a whole nother group, a whole big, very powerful group of mind control methods, strategies, techniques that instead use pleasure. Not pain and fear so much, instead pleasure and desire. And these are best described and warned against by Aldous Huxley. This is why I believe we should also read Brave New World, because they really go together. Because now in our world, governments and corporations, they use both. They mix them in both. They use pain and fear, these techniques described by Orwell, but they also use and mix the techniques of pleasure and desire to control us, as described by Huxley. Now, back in the 1960s, 70s, it was quite clear. In America, in the West, they mostly use the pleasure methods, the measures described by Huxley. And in the Soviet Union, the communist Marxist countries, they use the pain and fear techniques more. Now we see quite a mix. But these pleasure techniques are also very powerful and disturbing and terrible. For example, social media, the way people are kind of and just staring, right? It's your own desire. Your own desire to keep, liking and staring at a phone all day. This sort of just programs your mind. You're not afraid. It's not a technique of fear, but they're using your own desire and distraction. Most of television advertising uses Huxley's techniques of pleasure, right? Appealing to your pleasure. Oh, drink this beer and you can be with the sexy women. It's all this kind of stuff. They trying to use your desires, in a traditional religious, let's say Christian sense, they would describe it as sin, S-I-N, right? They're actually trying to appeal to your sins of greed, sexual desire, these kind of things. Also very powerful ways to control people. So it's really dangerous when they get mixed. So there's some fear and then there's also the desire. And by using both, you can control most people very powerfully, especially when you have the technology of mass media, television, movies, and social media. That's what's frightening, is that both of these techniques are so powerful, and we see a mix. And so in each country, each leader, each government, you'll see a different mix. Some might use more of the desire and the pleasure and greed and sex, distraction, all that kind of stuff. And in other countries, they might use much more of the fear and pain and that kind. And in some, there'll be just a complete mix. So that's why I do believe that to really fully understand modern mind control, you must also read Aldous Huxley and Brave New World to get the full picture. So we're getting kind of half the picture right now with George Orwell. Very important, but we'll have to do that another time. All right, I think we're going to end now the recording. So YouTube people, thank you very much. Facebook, I'll stay with you a little longer after the show and answer a few more questions. So hope you enjoyed Chapter 7. Read Chapter 8. I'll see you next week. We'll discuss Chapter 8 of Animal Farm. Almost done. Only 10 chapters total. So we have 8, 9, and 10. 3 more. As always, join my VIP program at effortlessenglishclub.com. Effortlessenglishclub.com.